Okay, hello panel. My name's Steve. So I'm just going to quickly in this video address one particular question that you gave me. I'm gradually deteriorating here with COVID, but I feel okay at the moment. Good to get some fresh air. So the question around an interview, radio interview addressing the impact of housing on ground nesting birds on the North Norfolk coast. So I think I'd probably assume at the moment that the impacts relate to recreational disturbance. There may be some kind of artificial nighttime lighting issues for ground nesting birds, as there probably are for stone curlew in the Brecks, but at the moment I'll just consider recreational impacts. So in terms of initial preparation, I think firstly I'd look at what the current situation is in terms of kind of strategically addressing recreational impacts on ground nesting birds and other kind of birds along the North Norfolk coast. So I would look at the kind of the planning policy framework that's in place or in development to address SPA recreational impacts and potentially SSI impacts of recreation. So I'd look at the county council planning policy framework in terms of looking at the quantum of housing growth within the kind of the region within easy travelling distance of the North Norfolk coast, from which kind of recreational impacts could be derived. And I chat to people like the casework team and the reserve staff and other conservation officers to get a feel for how robust we feel the current management framework is for addressing those recreational impacts from housing developments within the planning system. And I'd also look at the kind of the underlying evidence base. So people like Derwin Liley and Footprint Ecology, Bill Sutherland at Cambridge now, Jenny Gill at UEA have done sort of work. There's some old work from Derwin looking at ring plover recreational impacts, and some more recent work from UEA and Cambridge extending that work to address oyster catchers as well. So I'd look at the evidence base, see how strong the evidence in terms of the ecology of impacts is, and also issues around kind of travel distances and which housing developments are likely to give kind of impacts alone and in combination impacts on birds, ground nesting birds on the North Norfolk coast. And I'd also want to talk to the reserves team and conservation team, especially if the housing development is right in on the North Norfolk coast. The impacts could be more direct, whereas more housing in Norwich, for instance, is really an in combination effect, so less likely to have very direct effects that need to be mitigated actually within the footprint of the development. So I'd just kind of talk to the reserves team to see if they've got any concerns, depending on what the development actually is and where it's located. And I'd think about the audience, who am I actually trying to get through to during this radio interview? An obvious one being the decision makers, the county councils that produce the more strategic approach to recreational impact management, addressing the quantum of development across a kind of a catchment area. And I'd also want to talk to the district councillors responsible for both forward planning and individual planning applications. So all of those decision makers are responsible for considering habitat regulations assessments, and both at a strategic level of plans and at a more local level in terms of individual projects. So that'd be one target audience. Another target audience would be the developers themselves, just to ensure they properly understand the kind of the planning policy that's in place, assuming we actually, within the RSPB, think it's good enough to address concerns. And there may be opportunities within individual housing developments, especially if they're close to the coast, and the households are likely to directly walk their dogs out on to the kind of salt marsh or beaches with ringed plovers. There may be opportunities there to kind of provide educational materials for new households just so, to kind of appraise them of the sensitivity of the North Norfolk coast for ground nesting birds like ring plovers and oyster catchers and redshank, and the importance of keeping dogs under close control. And those households, if they're provided with that information, before they actually buy a property, and they choose to buy a property, then they're aware of the issues, and they could actually become ambassadors for those biodiversity interests, which could be really valuable. So in terms of key messages, so one obvious key message is that developers will need to make appropriate contributions towards strategic mitigation of recreational impacts, and local planning authorities at whatever level. This is a housing development, so it would be the district council considering a plan application. They would need to ensure that any kind of legal agreements reflect the strategic approach to impact management. For instance, an appropriate financial contribution is made and calculated using the strategic framework, which hopefully is in place or will soon be in place for the North Norfolk coast. And I'd use this as a broader opportunity just to raise awareness of the importance of the North Norfolk coast for ground nesting species like ring plovers, oyster catchers, redshank, little terns obviously, and use that as an opportunity just to raise awareness and to kind of mention during the interview the importance of keeping pets under close control and respecting any kind of on the ground mitigation steps that are put in place, such as kind of exclusion areas to allow ring plovers to nest, and fenced areas for little terns, that kind of thing. So it's a good opportunity to just raise awareness, bearing in mind that the coast is an incredibly important place for visitors and for people to get close to nature. It's just we need to do that in a way that respects wildlife, and quite often it's not obvious that there are ring plovers nesting on this bit of shingle beach, because the adults can be quite discreet and the eggs are invisible, and the chicks can be very difficult to see unless you're a dog, of course. And so just raising awareness, take every opportunity to do that. And finally, I would ideally direct people who are listening to online resources. So I'd probably be tempted to have a YouTube channel that outlines the kind of issues facing ground nesting birds on the North Norfolk coast, and kind of informing visitors of the kind of things they can do to kind of safeguard those birds. So we can have online videos and online materials, and we can direct people to those kind of resources. I'd highlight that during any interview.